Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining me on this pre-planning seminar called Think of Me When. Just to give you an introduction, my name is Jake. I live up here in Wisconsin, and the company I work for, Homesteaders, about 12 years ago, we did a focus group with people who have pre-planned, people that haven't pre-planned, and different professionals. So as we go through this course, if you haven't gotten one already, we will be emailing you soon a discussion guide. It's called Think of Me When. And in the discussion guide, you're going to see there's a couple different questions to each segment. So as I go through and share my personal story about what it was like losing my mother, we're going to take some pause points and play a little video. And then as we jump back into it, I'm going to share my story and what it was like for me and my family in navigating the time when I lost my mom. So hope you will stay with us. Our presentation will last about a half hour to 40 minutes, and thank you for tuning in.
When you see a family who hadn't made arrangements or a family who has, it's a big difference, because a lot of times with a family who has not made pre-arrangements, it's a lot of confusion with the family.
When my dad died, we were all in shock. It was very sudden, and there was no planning. And so we had to guess at what he wanted, and decisions were made based on emotion.
I think that sometimes it's just something that the average person doesn't think about.
My mother and I had never had the conversation as far as what her wishes were, as far as if she had made arrangements for payment in advance. The answer was no, she hadn't. And so on one of the worst days of my life, I was out getting a loan to pay for her funeral.
When you're under stress like that, there's almost no such thing as a small deal, and small things become big.
It was her wishes, and we followed her wishes to the T. And so it eliminated a lot of confusion, but also eliminated a lot of burden.
I feel good about it. I feel comfortable. I feel not just satisfied, but you know, oftentimes you have a burden that's on you if you know that you haven't taken care of business.
And it just was more practical and more loving to be able to let me know just exactly what she wanted done.
So we just got done watching Relieve the Burden. And when you get your study guide, there are two questions that I'll ask you. Is, if you have planned a funeral for a loved one, what do you remember most about the experience? And question two, is there one thing that would have helped relieve the burden to make the process a little easier? So after my mom was diagnosed in 2001, I was living in Kansas City, and I decided I wanted to move back home to be closer to her. So as I moved back, spending time with my mom, I took a job with Homesteaders Life Company, the company I'm working for now. One reason why is because I was very passionate about what they did. You know, not only do they preserve, but they're also promote the value of funeral service. And I'm going to share more of that story as we go along in these segments. But in 2001, after she was diagnosed, I started traveling for work, spending as much time as I could with her. If we go to March 25th, 2004, so my mom lived with it for about 2.5 to 3 years. I happened to be traveling for work up in Superior, Wisconsin, Duluth, Minnesota, and some of you may know where that is, but from where I live, it was about 6 hours from my house. When I got the call, my dad informed me that my mom took her last breath and she had passed away. That was a tough moment in my life. It was about a 6-hour drive home, and it was one of the longest drive homes I've ever had. Just because the thoughts that are with you, but the one piece of mind I did have in the chaos that I was going through at the time is I knew I didn't have to get my dad. We didn't have to go up to the funeral home and start planning out everything because they had already taken care of that. And I will share more of that personalization that we did with that as I move along this segment. The second question is, the one thing that would have helped relieve the burden to make the process easier. One thing I can't stress enough is our funeral director here in town. He was very good about giving us some things to think about, different things we could do to make it very special and meaningful, and I will share more about that in the next segment. But for now, we're going to move on to the next segment of the video. It's called Family Time.
The family can now grieve. They don't have to worry about what if, did we do the right thing? Did we make the right decision?
And you know, a death in the family can certainly bring out the best in people. It could bring out the worst, and it can do both on the same day.
If there are any issues between family members, death and dying does not bring out the best dynamics.
It's so easy for brothers and sisters, for instance, to feel that mom or dad would certainly not have wanted something or would have definitely wanted something.
I know when my own mother passed, you know, my sister was, I think we should do this. And, you know, I was like, I think we need to do that. And the boys were, well, don't you think we should do the other thing?
Pre-planning can avoid those types of conflicts, especially if mom and dad have made the decisions.
Now, all the family can comfort each other, and that makes a big difference in a person's life.
So that was family time. The 2 questions in your study guide when you get to it is, how do you think your family will react to discussing your final wishes? And 2, what is the biggest benefit to having your family involved in the discussions? So one thing for us, since my mom had cancer, we were forced to, I know everybody's got a different time frame and when they want to start talking about it, and I think it's our human nature just to put it off as long as we can. But if you have lived with somebody with cancer, we weren't sure when that time was going to happen. Is it sooner or later? And there's about 125 different decisions that we need to make, so time was of the essence. My mom and dad went up to our local funeral home and they picked out a lot of the logistical things, but it was important for my mom to involve my sister and I in the celebration of life that we were going to have when that time came. So 3 things that I think really stuck out in my mind for when we spent the final days with my mom. One thing is we took a day, and I know everybody has them. You go into an old cupboard and there's probably hundreds and hundreds of old photos taken from years past. And we probably spent, 5-6 hours going through each one of those photo albums. Some were when my mom was just a kid. There was times when she was a teenager, first married, but it was really neat to hear her narrate those stories. And in that time, my sister and I marked pictures that meant a lot to us that we wanted to involve in a video tribute for my mom and picture boards and that sort of thing. The second one, my mom was very involved in church, so there were certain hymnals that really meant a lot to her that she wanted to have played at her service. And we're kind of a quirky family, so one of the things we did is we made sure that our family song was sung. And before we go into the next segment called Starting the Conversation, I'm going to play that for you as we move into it. But one of the photos, this is my mom and I. This was probably 6 months before she had passed, but it was a nice, just a nice picture of her and I and something that I keep. So with that being said, we're going to go into this next segment, but I'm going to play you the family song when we were growing up that my mom sang for us each night. So I got this little music box and see if you can hear it as we move into the next video.
I feel as if everyone would want to be remembered a certain way, and it's very difficult to even think about how you want to be remembered. But if we ask them, how would you like to be remembered? What do you want to tell your children? What would you want them to know about how much you love them, about how much they touched your life, and how much they filled your life full of joy every single day?
We were able to have a more open discussion about what they're really feeling and what they really want. They had a couple children, and we could start talking more about what we could do to help them in the ceremonies, to make them be included in it.
after the process is over with, what I've gotten is say, oh, that wasn't as difficult as I thought it would be, or you made that easy.
We have people come in all the time who say, oh, we had the best time pre-arranging our funeral. It was so much fun. We really enjoyed it, and we're really glad that we took care of it.
Personally, I felt it was such an easy experience for myself, and actually it was a happy experience for me.
There's a lot of laughter, there's stories being shared, there's just a whole different mindset. They're more free because they're not dealing with that loss right up front.
The greatest gift that a child can give back to a parent, or even a spouse to another spouse, is having that conversation.
So that was starting the conversation. The two questions that I ask in that are, what are one or two things you could do now to make it easier for people to know your final wishes? And two, besides family, who else would you want to include in the conversation? I guess the biggest thing that I would recommend is just to start talking to your spouse or significant other about, maybe what you'd want in a funeral. I know it's not easy, but it's something we're all going to have to face with at some point. Funeral homes are a very good resource. Our particular funeral home has these, and the person that invited you has a planning guide where you could start filling out that information, and that way at least you have somewhat of a roadmap. If you don't do anything else but fill that out and make sure it's in a place where they can easily find it, I think that would be a good start. But I would encourage you to reach out to the person that invited you to the seminar, and they can talk to you a little bit more about some of the resources that they have. Besides family, who do you want to include in the conversation? For my mom, it was very different. She was very involved in her church, did a lot of volunteer work, and I just remember the last couple of weeks of her life, our pastor was over there every other day, and that was very comforting, not only for our family, but to her more importantly. So those are some of the things that you can get started as far as making it easier for people to understand your final wishes. With that, we're going to start the next segment.
I think the biggest benefit is that the customer who comes in to prearrange their funeral gets to decide and select what they want for a funeral.
The value in pre-planning I see is that it allows one to make their own decisions.
Oftentimes what happens, the family is not only struggling with what to do, but also the family is struggling over, Diane wants this, Diane would want this, Diane would want that. But what this does is certainly resolve all those questions so they might move forward.
It was very important for her to choose, because when she had to make the choice for my father, she always wondered if that's what he would have wanted.
When we get to the end of our life, we must want to tie our all the little loose pieces together too, and I think it's comforting to people to know that they've taken care of that.
I would tell them that it has given me a sense of comfort, that they should do it, because it does relieve the burden, not just with respect to the family, but it really does help you feel good about knowing that your plans are in order.
So that was called My Way. And the two questions in your study guide that I'll ask you is, what are the top two things you want people to remember about you? And question two is, how do you plan to let them know what those things are? Well, for my mom, growing up as kids back in the late 70s, early 80s, my folks were big gardeners, and we always had a family meal together. We all sat around the table. At the time, you go to restaurants, when you could go to restaurants, and you look around the room and everybody's got these things and are busy, nobody's talking to each other with those. Back then we had the television, and the television was not allowed on. But my mom always, it was important to her for us to get together as a family. And so one of her favorite meals was roasted chicken dinner. And so with that being said, that was just our time as a family to catch up on life, you know, what happened in school, work that day, what was going on. It was just a really neat time as I think back about the moments, you know, we spend as a family growing up. So I guess that's one thing we had. And during her celebration of life, she was like, well, anybody that comes to my funeral is going to get a hot family-style chicken dinner. And that's what we did, and that was very meaningful to us. So just think about some things that you've touched people in different ways, some things that people will remember about you and who you were, and how do you implement those into your own service. So with that being said, we're going to go on to the next segment called The Gift.
Survivors may not really truly recognize the importance of that gift that's being given to them, possibly until years in the future.
The greatest gift that a child can give their parents or a spouse can give to another spouse, again, is prearranging in the discussion of, beginning the discussion of prearranging.
And I think it was her final gift to my dad, to relieve the burden that he would have gone through trying to schedule and set up everything.
The most unselfish gift that someone can give to their family is to plan in advance.
It's a gift of pure love. It's a gift of considerate behavior. It's a considerate gift forever to hold and to hold dear, to know that mom and dad took care of everything in the way that they would want to see it be handled.
Because what you're saying to your loved one is, I love you so much that I don't want you to go through this, that I want to relieve some of this burden, some of the tension and stress, and this is what I can do for you.
Mother gave us a great gift by, you know, planning hers, paying for it. Not that we wouldn't have been happy to pay for it, but we didn't have to. So it really was a gift she gave us.
Probably the last best gift you can give your children is a prearranged funeral.
I consider prearranging a gift of love. I truly believe it is a gift of love.
So we just got watching this segment called The Gift. The two questions that I'll ask you in there is, what steps, if any, have you taken to ensure your loved ones know your final wishes? And two, what are two ways your loved ones could benefit from the gift of pre-planning? So after my mom had done her pre-planning and funding, it was about 4 years later, I was having a conversation with my dad, and at the time my sister was living in Seattle getting ready to move to New Zealand. And if something were to happen to him, everything would fall on me as far as making the plans, getting everything in order, making sure that everybody's back, and that sort of thing for my dad's service. So we went up to our local funeral home with my father and spent some time with him, getting all the planning done. And after that was done, I just felt like such a relief. So when that day comes, and I'm hoping it's not for a long, long time, because I just enjoy spending time with my father, but I know I have a peace of mind knowing that when it does happen, everything's going to be in order, all the way down to the details of the music he wants and everything else. So that is one gift, is a kid who experienced once losing his mom. As hard as it's going to be, I know that things are in place, so when my dad does pass, it'll be a lot easier for my sister and I. So with that, we'll move into the last segment called Just Makes Sense.
We take care of marriages, we plan for a childbirth, graduation, and you know, we often say, why not plan for the inevitable?
It's like planning your retirement. You know, everyone should start early in life, you know, saving and planning for their retirement. And this is just one more piece.
Being widowed at a very young age, I know what it's like, and I know what I went through Financially, I was prepared, but emotionally, I wasn't.
You know, you're planning what you're going to do, where you're going to go, what activities you're looking forward to, but you also need to plan for there's going to be an end. And you want to make that as easy for your family and your spouse as possible.
I think people just are realizing more and more the value of getting things done in advance like this, just as they do their wills, their power of attorney papers, their living wills and all this. Get everything in place, they get this in place also.
I think people prearrange or should prearrange because it makes financial sense, it makes emotional sense for your family, and it's just a good thing to do.
Do it. Just do it. Pick up the phone, call someone, go to a funeral home, talk with someone, talk to the children. And I know it's difficult. Children do not like to think about the loss of their parents, but sometimes parents have to take the lead and have that conversation. It's inevitable.
So we just watched the last series called It Just Makes Sense. With that, there are two questions. What are a couple of ways pre-planning makes sense for you or your loved ones? And two, when do you think you should begin pre-planning? Well, each family is a little different. For my mom, it was pretty much immediately, knowing that our time was limited. For my father, he had more time, but we just weren't sure when that would happen. So for each family, it's a little different. I'm a firm believer, if nothing else, if you at least get your plans in order and get them at your funeral home, so if something does happen, at least your kids have somewhat of a roadmap. And if you can afford it, and talk to your family or talk to your person that invited you, there are some different options and way you can get the funding started. So with that, I just want to thank you all for joining me tonight. I know it is a subject that is hard to talk about at times, but through experience, through my mom and my father, I can tell you that once it's done, at least for your kids, I mean, there's going to be such a burden, not only for you, but also for your kids, knowing that there is a plan in place. So with that, thank you for joining me, and I wish you well. Thank you.